Hi everyone, welcome to the Kraus Report. My name is Neria Kraus, and I'll take you through the historic events unfolding in the Middle East and in the US after President Trump decided to attack Iran and to pressure Israel and the Islamic Republic to agree to a ceasefire. The future of the region is still unclear. I tried to ask President Trump about it when I met him at the White House this week. A new dawn in the Middle East that you managed to achieve last night. The region is going to a new place with this agreement. Can you tell us what's your future plans for Gaza, for the hostages?
It's a new dawn. I appreciate the question. You're very nice. Who are you?
I'm Neria Kraus from Israeli Channel 13 News.
Well, we have to have Israel calm down because they went on a mission this morning. I got to get Israel to calm down now.
I've been hearing in the past few days from my sources that there are real discussions taking place regarding a possible hostage ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas. Bishara Bachbach, he is the representative of President Trump and Steve Witkoff to these talks. He is in Egypt right now talking to Hamas representatives, and they're trying to figure out a way to make that work. And President Trump is trying to pressure the key players in the region to go for a ceasefire deal that will also include in the future the expansion of the Abraham Accords. So President Trump is working really hard on that, and his envoy to the region, to the Middle East, Steve Witkoff, is working hard on that as well. And that might actually happen. Prime Minister Netanyahu might come to the White House pretty soon. To learn more about the American attack, whether the U.S. will have to strike again, what damage was caused to the nuclear program, and where we're heading with Gaza and the hostages, I met with the most relevant person, Dan Shapiro. He was a senior Pentagon official until a few months ago. He knows everything there is to know about Iran and the attack, and he knows the Middle East very well since he was the U.S. ambassador to Israel. Today, he's a member of the Atlantic Council. Dan Shapiro, thank you so much for being with us.
Good to be with you, Neria.
Tell me a little bit about the past 2 weeks from your point of view. How did you feel? It was a complete madness, I would say, coming from the Middle East?
Definitely madness. Of course, I'm out of government, so I don't have the same responsibilities I used to, but still, as a policy expert on demand to talk to the media and talk to everybody, try to explain it and just try to understand it myself, it was kind of madness. I mean, I thought this crisis was inevitable, and I thought it was probably necessary. It did come a little sooner than I expected. I thought it would be a little bit later in the year. President Trump had launched these negotiations with Iran. Actually, he got them launched much faster than I thought he would, because probably the use of force against the Houthis was a wake-up call to the Iranians that they'd better get to the table. They did in April. He said 60 days. The talks were moving forward, and I thought they probably would take a little more time. In fact, it seemed he had a meeting scheduled on day 63, and it seemed he wanted a little more time. Not that there was a likelihood the Iranians were going to agree to his terms, which was no enrichment of uranium. Obviously, the Prime Minister had different ideas, came to the President, said, I need to do this on day 61. I've got a window of opportunity. I can't wait. You know, the President of the United States had the opportunity to give him a red light. He didn't do that. So the operation launched. And of course, it launched, and initially the U.S. reaction, the first statement from Secretary Rubio that night was very kind of distant, saying this is Israeli unilateral, we had nothing to do with it. Then, of course, on the first day, when it became clear Israel was having a lot of success, had incredible intelligence penetration, was striking nuclear sites, missile sites, leadership targets, scientists, then the president decided he wanted to associate himself with it. So then it went along, and I guess, then it came to the point of the decision point, who is going to deal with Fordo, because to achieve the objective, which was no enrichment, you have to deal with Fordo, and obviously the U.S. had the bunker busters, the unique capabilities, and so then that discussion got underway. Even then, when the president gave his 2-week window, I thought, well, that's too long, frankly, but I figured it would take a week to do the back and forth, see if the Iranians had any interest in negotiating an off-ramp. Of course, he didn't wait for that, and on day 3 of the 2 weeks, he did the bombing. So all of this is historic. All of this is, momentous in terms of the history of the region, in terms of the U.S.-Israel relationship, in terms of the Iranian nuclear program. Exactly what it produces, we'll see, and we'll talk about it. But this was definitely madness these last 2 weeks.
But I did read some of your assessments on Twitter, and it seemed like you had a sense that the U.S. is about to do something with Iran.
Well, it was clear that the president had put in place the force to allow him to do this. Again, I thought he would take a little longer to make the actual decision, but well before that,
But you saw the specific actions as someone who really knows the
Yes.
Pentagon from within.
Yes, this was, I mean, I'm familiar with the plans that he was using, and of course, getting the second aircraft carrier into the region, getting additional tanker aircraft and fighter aircraft into the region to be prepared for any response, and in some ways to help support the bombers when they would come. They're, of course, the last element. Evacuating U.S. forces and personnel from bases and embassies and things in the Gulf and in Iraq. These were all signs that he was giving himself the opportunity to make that decision to order that strike kind of at any moment. And then it's just a question of how long you wait. That's why when he said 2 weeks, which everybody knows now is
it's just like a term he says.
His standard way of punting a decision. I thought, if the Iranians read that as just standard punt, he said 2 weeks for sanctions on Russia 6 weeks ago. That hasn't happened. I thought, this could really drag on for a long time. I didn't really expect he'd cut it down to 3 days. Frankly, I said on the night that he said 2 weeks, 1 week feels like about right. The Iranians should know they have one last chance to agree to what they would not agree to in the negotiations before the war started, which was end the Iranian enrichment program so they have no path to a nuclear weapon. And then if they don't, then you have to do the strike. He made the decision to do it much sooner on day 3.
As a person who really knows the programs and the way the U.S. prepared for that, when you saw the news on Friday Eve or Saturday morning that the B-2 bombers are in the skies, did you understand that this is coming?
Well, I obviously understood we were that much closer, but it wasn't a given that they were going to fly all the way to Iran without any stop. They're capable of that, of course, so I knew that. But it was possible he could have flown them to Diego Garcia or to Al Udeid Air Force Base. And
everyone talked about Guam.
Correct, or Guam even, right, anywhere on the way as a signal, as a further means of pressure to Iran. It was possible, and frankly, that flight is so long, my guess is he had them in the air, but hadn't made the final decision on actually dropping the MOP on Fordo until they were already en route. So there was a possibility of using that as signaling and one more lever of pressure against Iran. But as I said, obviously he decided to do it almost right away.
As I understand, President Trump knew that the pilots are in the air, and he had the opportunity to say no. This is already taking place. If you'd like to say no, you need to say a clear no, and then we can abort mission.
Right. So the military, of course, follows their instructions and their orders, and that must have been the order to get in place to do that strike, even to do that strike. But, of course, the President of the United States always has the ability to call something off. In fact, there's a history of that. President Trump did call off a strike in response to the downing of an American drone by Iran in his first term, 2019 or 20. And he claimed that he asked a general, how many casualties will this strike produce? And he said 150, and he called it off 10 minutes before the weapon was launched. That's his story, as he tells it on his social media. So President of the United States has that opportunity. Look, if the Iranians, while the planes were in the air, had come and said, you know what, we're ready to talk about zero enrichment, probably he should have told them not to drop the bomb.
Take me a little bit to the backstage, to the preparations, weeks and months before the Biden administration is replaced by Trump. What's going on behind the scenes? You're actually considering to do the strike. You decided not to do it eventually.
Look, from October 7th on, President Biden's approach was he's going to give some maximum support to Israel, military assistance, intelligence, diplomatic support, all sorts of support. And that was the policy that ran all the way through the rest of his term. But also that he wanted to prevent the war from spreading and widening and becoming a regional war, and a war that would pull the United States in. Of course, we had a massive military posture in the region, most of the time 2 aircraft carriers, at least 1, many other ships, many other planes and troops and other assets. So we were present, but he still had hoped that we would not see the war widen and see the war expand. And so while he has always said, as every previous president had said, that he would use military action to prevent Iran from getting a nuclear weapon, for him that was a last resort decision, and we had to watch and see. If Iran took that step, then he'd be available to it. But by the summer, especially after the Iranian attack on Israel on April 13th, which we worked together with our coalition to help defend Israel, it was, the discussion changed a little bit to say, look, we're now 5-6 months out. I think this was especially true after President Biden withdrew from the race. And so there was going to be a transition, whether it was a transition to Harris or a transition to Trump.
No
we didn't
elections
know.
are interrupting this decision.
Correct. And it wasn't as if, if there was going to be a second Biden administration, there's not the same sort of transition. So, the question was sort of put on the table, how would we deal with Iran making a sprint to break out during the transition? That seemed to be the most dangerous time when they could do that. And so, as American administrations are a little distracted, some people are leaving, other people are coming, but haven't gotten started yet. So we really wanted to be ready for that possibility. So we did review the plans, refresh the plans. Obviously, CENTCOM, is constantly updating these plans. But then again, there needed to be a second refresh after Israel strikes in Iran on October 26th, following the second Iranian attack, because Israel changed the air defense picture. One of the main things you have to do in a plan like this is make sure you suppress the enemy air defenses. And so that was part of the plan. But when Israel had taken out the S-300s, it didn't mean there was nothing left, but it meant you had to go back and revise. So this is the end of October, already maybe a week before the election. So things were in place to be able to conduct that strike if the threshold was reached. And that, again, takes us back to the broader policy objective, which was try to prevent the spreading of the war, be prepared to use military force to prevent an Iranian nuclear weapon if that's required. And the Iranians, I think, understood that was the better part of wisdom for them was to kind of lower their heads, not to do something extremely provocative that would make it look like they were making a sprint. In fact, the big expansion of enrichment to 60% took place after President Trump took office. There wasn't a big change. There was some additional enrichment, but there wasn't a big change in the transition period. They were at the level they were at, which was already too much. But in terms of a trigger that would have said to President Biden, it's now or never, that never really presented itself during the transition.
Did you feel like it was the right decision not to do it at the end of Biden's term?
I think, again, it's sort of a last resort option. There was, obviously, it would have been satisfying to say, on our watch, we kind of, firmly dealt with this issue. But you need a strong reason and a strong trigger, and the Iranians were being cautious and careful and didn't do that. So I don't second guess the decision. I think President Trump found himself in quite a different situation by the time the decision was presented to him.
Take me to the preparations for the attack. How does it work at the Pentagon? I mean, whatever you can say.
Yeah, there's not that much you can say. Look, CENTCOM, General Kurilla and his team are incredible, thorough, detailed, precise planners. They plan, they rehearse, they know how to integrate assets from all different services. And to do an operation like that means pulling in assets from all over the world. Air Force assets, naval assets, Army assets, Marine Corps, the support functions, the refueling, the defending, the air defense, the fighters that might have to respond to any Iranian retaliation. So this was a tremendously complex plan, and we had just had great confidence in our military that they had thought of every contingency, that they sort of reviewed it almost on a rolling, constant basis. When needed, they would come and present it and brief it to the Secretary, to the President, to others in the national security leadership, with the Joint Chiefs of Staff, of course. And it gave us a lot of confidence that we had a contingency if we needed it. Now, one question was, of course, if Iran, already being very, very close to a breakout capability, if they decided to really sprint in a matter of days, but it takes more than days, maybe it takes a few weeks to really set the theater, to really get all your assets in place, then you need a second contingency. Okay, how would we act if we were starting from zero? We weren't starting from zero, of course. We had a lot of assets in the theater, but if we might need 3 to 4 weeks to really get everything we'd want in there, and then Iran takes a move that looks like they can get to the other side of breakout in 7 days, then you need to have a second contingency of maybe less than the full strike, but it might be a way to buy yourself time till you can get everything else in place. So we had to look at those options as well.
How often were you talking to the Israelis about this?
Well, we were talking to the Israelis almost on a constant basis about our respective operations. Look, after Israel strikes in Iran on October 26th and the elimination of the S-300s, certainly the idea was raised in those discussions and even in internal U.S. discussions that this is a different picture. We should think about how that affects our judgment. And of course, Israel had to think about how it affected its own judgment on whether a window had opened. And of course, with Hezbollah also decimated, because then Iran's losing its second strike capability that was always part of the deterrent against an Israeli or U.S. strike. So we had that discussion, how does this change things?
Were the Israelis pressuring you to do that?
I wouldn't say pressuring. I'd say it was a discussion. And, again, this was almost immediately we were into a transition. So it's a lot to put on the plate of an outgoing administration. I think President Biden would have done it if he felt he needed to. But I think within a few weeks, it became even clear to the Israelis that this is complicated business, and unless there was a triggering event, it's something that you take a little more time to work through with a new administration than the time you have left with the outgoing.
You had an interesting tweet this week. You wrote, "I disagree with Trump on almost everything, but I think this is overstated. Almost every president of both parties has conducted military action on a similar basis. Congress usually claims he lacks authority. It is a feature, not a bug, of our constitutional system."
Right. So this is about the debate that is now taking place in Congress, where there are critics who say, look, the president should have come to Congress to seek an authorization. Only Congress has the power to declare war. Congress should approve of these actions before they take place. There should at least be consultation. And I've worked both on Capitol Hill and I've worked in administrations, and I know that it's a pretty standard divide between the executive branch and the legislative branch. Legislators tend to want to have more input, more say, more ability to give their advice. Congress rarely actually declares war. That hasn't happened, I think, since World War II or maybe the Korean War, but only occasionally, but sometimes they give some sort of prior authorization. Other times there's a consultation, and that's healthy, by the way. I think the administration should have done more of that. They should have come to speak to the congressional leadership, even in classified settings, in order to explain what they were thinking about doing. That, I think, is an appropriate thing to do for the representatives of the American people, both Republican and Democratic. I think that should be the practice. But I also know that almost every executive branch, I would say every president that I know of in my lifetime, has also taken the position that the Constitution gives the president authority as commander-in-chief to make these kinds of decisions, especially when there's kind of a limited time and a limited window to do them. And the fact that President Trump did it in this case isn't that different. It's a major event, but it's not that different from a number of things that President Biden did, that President Obama did, that President Clinton did, President Bush, and President Trump in his first term. So I see that as a feature of the constitutional system, that there's this struggle between the two branches. And the first sentence there where I said I disagree with Trump on everything, I do. He's not my choice to be president or commander-in-chief, and I think he's doing a lot of damage to the United States of America. I'll be perfectly honest about that. But I had to sort of try to call that one as I saw it, which was that he made a decision that's similar to the decisions many other presidents of both parties have made, and the members of Congress reacted as members of Congress often do in those situations, and we've seen that before many times.
Did he do the right thing?
Well, look, I think this was an inevitable and necessary action because I don't think the Iranians were likely to agree to the outcome that was necessary, which was to end their enrichment program. I would have counseled a bit more time on the negotiations, on the diplomacy, to see if that could work. Coercive diplomacy, where it's very clear that there's a credible military threat, and that started to appear at the end as the president put those forces into place. But you want to give that a little time to mature and get inside the Iranians' heads and think, gee, do we really want to face this strike? The decision on whether or not to ask the Israelis to wait and give him more time, that's a judgment call based on a lot of factors I may not have full knowledge of. But I would have given the diplomacy a bit more time, but I pretty much expected that we would reach this crisis and it would be inevitable and necessary to conduct a strike at some point during this year, probably no later than October.
Based on your knowledge, do you think that Fordo is completely eliminated?
I don't want to speculate on what I don't know. There's, of course, intelligence that I don't have access to. I really don't think we know. Just as I walked in here, I saw a CNN report that said early intelligence assessments, I guess someone's leaking, say that the program was not fully destroyed, only set back a few months. I think it's premature. I don't think we really know. The damage that those bunker busters can do if the operation went as it was hoped to was quite significant. It wouldn't necessarily reduce the whole mountain to rubble, but it would certainly make it difficult to regenerate that program at that site, quickly. We know the other sites were also struck. So I don't think we know really. It's really important that at this point we work to get the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, back in to Iran and do the inspections and take account of the enriched uranium, any remaining centrifuges, any remaining centrifuge production capability, and try to get that diplomatic path back toward Iran relinquishing this enrichment capability that gives them a path to a nuclear weapon. Iran's going to resist that. We're going to need help from European partners, Gulf partners. We're going to have to put incentives on the table, not just penalties. And then, of course, we might have to consider additional strikes if necessary.
Yeah, do you think that the U.S. might strike again?
Look, hopefully we don't have to. If the imperative is to keep Iran away from a nuclear weapon and enough of the program survived and they can get on that path, that might be necessary. But hopefully it's not necessary. And I do think there's an opening for some diplomacy here. But diplomacy now takes place in a different environment because it's after both Israel and the United States have shown the ability to do significant damage inside Iran. So I don't think I want to counsel I don't want to give my answer based on speculation about what we don't yet know. We need the facts. It'll probably take days to weeks to really understand the damage done and hopefully getting the IAEA inspectors in to do it themselves. But the imperative and the outcome remains the same. Keep Iran from having the enrichment capability that allows them to produce a nuclear weapon. We've now got a whole range of tools, from diplomatic to inspections to sanctions to incentives, and if necessary, military action, further military action to make sure we end up in that place.
Some people are saying that Iran might be desperate now to go get a nuclear bomb.
Yeah,
and that it might be, even faster if they have the ability.
Yeah, look, there's risk here, and that is one of the scenarios that a number of critics or opponents of this strike have said, which is that if they think that now they've also lost Hezbollah as that deterrent, now they really need a deterrent because they've been attacked, and the only one left is a nuclear weapon. They might rush to do something that they so far had not rushed to do. They stayed just below the line. And there's risk in that, and so we have to have the intelligence and the inspections and the knowledge to be able to use all the tools we have to prevent that. I have to say, the question that a lot of people have been asking me is, well, how close were they? Were they, just about there? Were they racing toward it? And I think my answer to that is they were too close for comfort. And here's why. There's no dispute that they had 10 bombs worth of 60% enriched uranium. The IAEA documented that and published that just a month ago. And no dispute that they have the ability to enrich that to weapons grade 90%, one bomb within days and several bombs within a few weeks. That's clear. The question really is on, have they made progress on the separate process of building a weapon that you'd put the enriched uranium into? And they, of course, in 2003 had paused their nuclear weapons program, and there's no evidence that the Supreme Leader has ever restarted it formally and given an order, go build me a nuclear weapon. However, and here's where I have to be careful because I'm referring to information I had access to in government, there has been activity and there has been research going on that would shorten the time it would take them to build a nuclear weapon if and when they got that order from the Supreme Leader. And that means we really could be within just a short number of months. And that is too close for comfort because something else has changed. And that is that after Iran, on 2 occasions, conducted massive state-against-state attacks, acts of war, shooting rockets, missiles, ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, drones toward Israel in April and October of last year, that's a different situation. That is not the proxy war. That is not the shadow war. That is not terrorist attacks, bad as those are. That is not even Hezbollah with the missiles that they could have drawn. This is state-against-state acts of war. It's in the context of after October 7th, when, of course, Israelis are understandably not going to let threats mature to the last possible minute before they address them. But even for the United States, to see a government prepared to use that kind of violence in a state-on-state act of war, and imagine just if one of those missiles was tipped with a nuclear warhead, we'd be in a different world. We just can't allow them to come to that last possible minute, which they were doing activities that would get them closer to that even before they had a decision from the Supreme Leader. Some of the predictions, I saw Tucker Carlson saying thousands of Americans will die and, it's going to be a bloodbath and it's going to be a repeat and everything. Well, look, there are a whole series of decisions that follow, and there are scenarios where you can go there, but there are also scenarios where you can do something contained to achieve a specific, very important objective. You can use deterrence and the need to escalate if necessary to deter Iran from responding. That seemed to be what happened, right? They did that sort of performative, not very serious response against our base in Qatar, which was mostly evacuated.
Sort of like a theater.
Kind of theatrics, right? And so, look, nothing's over yet, right? I'm not sort of saying we know the outcome here, but I think to assume that any time we use force in support of a diplomatic and national security priority, it's going to necessarily pull us into a years-long and highly costly military engagement where we'll lose thousands of lives. Those are not necessarily, equivalent scenarios.
And I think, by the way, you're talking about that theatrical attack by Iran against the U.S. in Qatar. I think that what President Trump just did was pretty mind-blowing in a sense that he managed to say, okay, that's okay, I can handle this attack, and let's do a ceasefire. Yeah,
that's true. Now, look, I think his...
I know it's hard for you to compliment him.
No, look, I mean, I'll say what I did say. I've already said it on X that, I think he made the right choice here. I also say, of course, I disagree with many things he does. I think there was effective diplomacy, and I think there was effective military decision-making here. But what gives me a lot of concern is his still very kind of impulsive, improvisational style of thinking out loud on his social media platforms, declaring 1 minute we are interested in regime change, but then no, we're not interested in regime change, and giving instructions to Israel on when and how to attack and when and how to do the ceasefire, and declaring on the first night, actually, we've completely and totally obliterated these nuclear sites. He didn't know that. We don't know that. The military, when they briefed the next day, General Kane, our chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, was not able to repeat that statement because he doesn't know. We don't have the information yet. So his loose, imprecise handling of facts, his desire to try to shape reality to fit what he wants the impression to be, even if the facts don't support it, and his kind of shooting out very boisterous and blustery statements toward parties that we would do better to communicate with in more discreet and more precise ways, I think does us harm. And so, while I can agree with the decision, I'm not a big fan of some of the execution around it.
And did you see the White House press sort of situation while he was using colorful words? Yeah,
he dropped an F-bomb, and that's we don't usually see that from a president of the United States, certainly on the White House lawn.
That have been fighting so long and so hard that they don't know what the fuck they're doing. Do you understand that?
Look, he wanted the ceasefire to hold, and that's understandable. I guess it's a little unclear if the Iranians violated at the end. Obviously, there was a very costly strike in Beersheba, and so it's understandable that Israel wanted to respond. By the way, there was something else that was sort of confusing, which was his post the night before, where he explained how the ceasefire would come into being. There was the 12 hours and then another 12 hours, and sort of meant like Israel would have additional 12 hours to strike even after Iran stopped, which doesn't make a lot of sense. Hard to believe Iran would agree to that. So again, there's more professional and more precise ways to conduct these decisions, to communicate them to the public, to communicate them to Congress, to communicate them to our foreign partners and to our adversaries than the way he does it on his social media platform.
Did you read what Antony Blinken wrote?
I've only seen the headline. I haven't had a chance to read his piece yet.
So I can give you some headlines. It's saying that the biggest mistake was to leave the agreement, the nuclear agreement, and that if Trump would have stayed there, he wouldn't have to attack.
Right. I agree with that, by the way. I mean, I said before we're somewhat captive by that historical debate, but that was my position in 2018. It was a mistake to withdraw from the agreement, especially without something to replace it. Iran then did what we sort of predicted and expected it would do. It started to violate its commitments in the JCPOA, some during Trump, more during Biden, even more when Trump came back into office. And I think that was a mistake. I think we wouldn't necessarily be here now.
But he did also say that he spoke to some professionals that told him that the U.S. B-2 and the bombs will not diminish the nuclear program.
Well, I think obviously all of these things are things that have been tested and assessed and examined But until you try something in real life, you don't know the actual impact. There's a lot I can't say about that. I will say I think our military had good confidence that they could be effective in using those weapons and that platform against the Fordo facility. Again, I think there's much we still don't really know about the damage done at the facility, so I don't want to draw the conclusion based on one news report and some, maybe selectively leaked very initial assessments. I have no doubt that Secretary Blinken had heard from the people he says he heard from, but there are a lot of people who really did believe that this weapon, which is largely designed for this very purpose and this very strike on that very site, could do the job necessary. And the military is telling us they feel they executed the strike the way it was designed. Now we have to get the information about how much damage it actually did.
We spoke in the past about how it feels like to be at the Pentagon during a strike against Israel or by the Iranians. How did it feel like to be at home when it happened this time?
Listen, while at the Pentagon, any night that the United States was conducting operations, we were at our desks late into the night and we were monitoring it in real time.
Pizza statistics.
I think that's a myth. That tells
Really?
you that tells you very much. Yes, I think that's a myth. The Pentagon is a huge place. I mean, thousands and thousands of people work there.
Jones have more.
Yeah, but 99% of the people who work in the Pentagon aren't going to be working any given night, but there will be other people working on that night. So I think it's a myth. But, what do I know?
Are you eating so many pizzas?
I was not eating pizzas those nights. I was eating snack granola bars. But we'd be there late. We'd watch and make sure that our pilots, were able to return safely, that they, had any support they needed. Same thing when Israel was under attack in April and in October. We were deeply involved in support of our military as they did this incredible work to help Israel defend itself from those attacks. So I know what that feels like to watch it in real time and watch it with different sources of information and even things you can view on screens. And you feel much more connected to it. Like everybody, I saw the president's post Saturday night. I knew, as you said, the B-2s were already long in the air, but didn't know where they were going to land. In the end, they didn't land until they came home. So I had to do a little more of the imagining of the information I would have otherwise had. But look, I'm incredibly proud of our military. I think they are just without question the most professional, most lethal, most impressive military and certainly groups of professionals I've ever worked with. So I felt that surge of pride as an American that when called upon to achieve a very important national security objective, they can achieve the mission.
Did you know that it was an option to be 37 hours in a row in the skies?
Yes.
Yeah?
Yes.
What are they doing during this time? How are they handling it?
They've got all sorts of ways of arranging for one pilot to rest while another pilot flies, and I don't know how they go to the bathroom, but they must have some arrangement for that too.
They're not eating pizzas.
They're probably not eating pizzas, but these pilots, as Israeli pilots are kind of a special breed of human, trained to the highest possible level, incredibly disciplined. So, and of course, they refuel in the air, so they don't have to land. How they manage to work out the sleep and the rest thing, they've got a protocol.
And the restrooms?
And restrooms. They've got a protocol. I don't know all the details.
But it's incredible to hear what they've done.
It's incredible. It's incredible. And, look, that is the crown jewel of our Air Force in many ways, and really of our strategic force and capability for the most serious missions we might ever have to conduct. So you use it. It had been used earlier. It had been used even during the Biden administration on one occasion against the Houthis. A message to Iran, by the way. It had been positioned in Diego Garcia earlier in the Trump administration and used also against the Houthis then, and another message to Iran. But you only roll that particular plane out of the hangar and onto the runway when you've got something really, really important to do, and we did.
It will be true to say that you had sort of a FOMO last week.
A little bit.
A little bit.
Guilty as charged.
Yeah. Next up, Dan and I will talk about the possible ceasefire hostage deal. If you like this episode, this is a quick reminder to subscribe to the Kraus Report. We saw some sort of a fracture between Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Trump when he felt like he fooled him, in a sense, when it came to the ceasefire. This is something that was really there during the Biden's administration. Biden did not trust Netanyahu. When you're there, sitting in your office at the Pentagon, is it something that really affects your work? Politics really get involved?
Well, obviously, it always helps when the leaders are on the same page. It helps when they're speaking regularly. It helps when they've got a good, trusting relationship. And there have been tensions, not only with Netanyahu, other foreign leaders, and not only with Biden. Now, we've seen it with Trump. I think it's probably been true with almost any president at different times that served with Prime Minister Netanyahu. And, you get, look, it's easier to plan and it's easier to know the direction of the policy when there's less of that friction. We had the advantage while I was serving in the Pentagon that Secretary of Defense Austin and Minister of Defense Gallant had just an incredible relationship, incredible trusting relationship, and we're speaking 2 or 3 times a week, and sometimes more often, sometimes in the middle of an operation 2 or 3 times a day. And the conversation was sort of ongoing, and there was a very similar worldview, 2 former soldiers. Some differences for sure, some disagreements, but they knew how to talk through them and find the right answer. So, in the Pentagon, I think you have the benefit that a lot of this is being done through very professional channels, the IDF and CENTCOM, people like Austin and Gallant. And you're a little bit shielded from the politics. But obviously, we always had to take our instructions from the White House. And sometimes those instructions would be something that wasn't exactly what our Israeli colleagues had hoped to hear, but they were subject to, what their government said. We were subject to what our leaders said. I hope that this disagreement, it seemed there was one over the ceasefire this morning, is a short episode. It's interesting, by some people have said that Prime Minister Netanyahu recruited Trump to join his strike and pulled him in to conduct the U.S. strike, and that's a major diplomatic achievement for Netanyahu. I don't know whether to think about it that way or not. I do know that the fact that President Trump decided to do this, which was clearly something that many Israelis, not just the Prime Minister, were going to see positively and hoped would happen, and obviously could do something, at least at Fordo, that Israel couldn't necessarily do all by itself, gives President Trump a lot of leverage in that relationship. So he can, when he's unhappy and he wants something, he can say to the Prime Minister, look what I just did. How can you say no to me? And I have a feeling...
And that just happened. 2 last questions. Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia had great incentives to do normalization with Israel because of Iran. Do you think that now they may be saying something like, if there's no nuclear threat, we don't want to go to normalization with Israel? It's not as important for us anymore?
Well, it's a really interesting question because one of the main things that the Saudis wanted out of normalization with Israel, at least while we were in government, was a security commitment from the United States. And we were negotiating that very treaty between the U.S. and Saudi Arabia. And we could have probably finished it had the war in Gaza ended, had there been ceasefire, hostage deal, and some path forward on the Palestinian issue. We didn't get to those things, but that was what the Saudis most wanted at the time. Now, I think they've already had to rethink that question for a number of reasons. But chiefly, well, I think the current Israeli government is going to give them what they would want on the Palestinian issue, but chiefly because it's not clear President Trump would give them what they want on a security commitment. But look how he treats our NATO allies. Look how he treats our Asian allies. It may be that a security commitment under a Trump presidency, even if it's a treaty ratified by the Senate, isn't the same or isn't worth as much as a treaty commitment might have been under President Biden, who really prized and valued those alliance relationships. So I think the Saudis were already asking that question. Now, of course, if the thing they were most concerned about and felt most that they needed the U.S. security commitment to address was the potential for Iranian nuclear weapons, then that also, if the program has been well set back, again, depending on what we learn about that, may become less of an incentive. But look, on the other side, Israel has shown itself to be very powerful and very effective and able to, harm its enemies all across the Middle East. It had total air superiority in Iran. I could imagine that the Saudis are looking at that and saying, it wouldn't be bad to be, associated with that partner so that we could work together. They can do some of that already, in the quiet ways that happen without normalized relations. But I don't rule out that this actually, again, we've got to know more about the nuclear program, but this actually could open a pathway that's for the last, say, year or so not been open to get back to the table on normalization.
Maybe more of a personal question. I went to a Jewish deli. The owner told me, during these days, I feel so proud to be a Jew. seeing what the Israelis can do, seeing their strength, their ability to conduct this crazy operation in the Iranian skies, to even be able to live in Israel when you have to go to the shelter. And he told me, I feel really proud to be a Jew these days. So I'm wondering, is it something that you feel as well?
Well, I feel some of those things, but I'm approaching these questions as an American foreign policy professional. I'm definitely impressed. I think anybody watching what Israel achieved was impressed, right? The intelligence penetration, the ability to strike with precision and simultaneity against multiple targets, multiple leaders and scientists and missile sites and nuclear sites, all kind of at the same window of time. The planning and the coordination that takes is just remarkable, and to do it so far from home, and with all the support that requires of air refueling and everything else, and then within a day or two at most to establish air superiority and see Israeli planes flying back and forth between Israel and Iran. I talked to one Israeli member of the military who said by day 4 it was kind of getting routine. Oh, we're going back to Tehran just like yesterday. Yeah. That is extraordinary. And look, Iran is a highly dangerous, aggressive, ruthless to neighbors and of course to Israel and also to its own people regime. And seeing its capabilities set back, especially after all that it has done to cause harm to Israelis, to Americans, to Arabs, to Iranians, to Europeans. There's some satisfaction in that, and so it's hard not to salute the Israeli action. Obviously, all of this should be in the service of strategic objectives, and in this case, that is ensuring that this highly dangerous regime doesn't have the most dangerous weapon. And so, a lot was done to achieve that, first by the Israeli strikes, then by the American strikes. We have to make sure it was successful, and to the extent it needs to be built upon through diplomacy or through other means, we have to follow up and do that too. But yeah, there's, I'm always proud to see our friends succeed. Israel is one of our best friends. Certainly proud as a Jewish American of Israel. But as an American, I think, having partners who can conduct that kind of sophisticated and effective military and intelligence operation, all fused in such a difficult and challenging location, we are lucky to have partners like that.
Last question about Gaza and the hostages. Do you feel like it's the right time to do that?
Absolutely. This has to be the window to use the leverage that's been created to drive toward the end of the war and getting all the hostages home. Iran is weaker than it's ever been and exposed in ways it has never been before. That should be leveraged and I think can be leveraged to get Hamas to be more flexible on the terms of the hostage deals. I frankly think Israelis are exhausted and need a break. And Hamas, of course, must be removed from power in Gaza. But there's not only one way to do that. And as part of a broad deal that gets all hostages home with their families where they belong, the living and the deceased, there can be additional efforts taken together with Arab states who also want Hamas out to exile the remaining Hamas leaders and fighters, to get ready to do reconstruction with Palestinian leaders and Palestinian civilians who want to live peacefully alongside Israel. That's where we need to get to. I think there's a way to get to that sooner than some of the proposals that are out there, which could have this war drag on for the rest of the year. Maybe with ceasefires, temporary ceasefires, but I think everybody, most of all the hostages, need to get past that so they can get home safely before we lose any more of them. I think the Israeli public has made pretty clear that's sort of their preference by about 70%, but also the exhaustion I know many Israelis are feeling. That would be good. And none of this is to sacrifice the goal of making sure Hamas is removed from power in Gaza and Gaza is disarmed. That has to happen. But I do think there's a window here to use the achievements of this operation against Iran to try to improve the speed and the terms under which we get to the end of the war in Gaza and get the hostages home.
Let's pray that this would happen soon.
Absolutely.
Dan Shapiro, thank you so much for being with us.
My pleasure. Thanks.